David Daly, would you take up the baton?
Thank you. Well, firstly, I'd like to congratulate you on the equation. You know, Asia plus Europe equals Australia. Put a question mark there. But it's interesting to play around always, I think, with equations. You know, like we did in school. If Asia plus Europe equals Australia, that means that Australia minus Europe equals Asia. It begs the question, Europe plus what equals Australia? And Australia plus what equals Asia? And this is more than just a play on words. I think that there are important issues here for Australia. If Australia is to play a role as portal into the rest of Asia, you first have to ask yourself whether you put the question as a portal into Asia or into the rest of Asia. Is Australia part of Asia or not? Becomes part of the issues that you have to grapple with. And I would agree with Patrick, from an outsider's perspective, you see here in Australian cities, you do see a lot of Australian citizens who are not of European or Indigenous Australian stock, who are Asian. And this is an enrichment for this country. This gives this country certain advantages which are uniquely Australian. Now, if you put the question, does Europe need Australia to act as a bridge into Asia? The strict answer to that, of course, is no, for the reasons that Patrick outlined. We have a long history of relations with Asia and so on. Does our business need Australia? Again, the answer is no. We have €1 billion trade a day with China as the European Union, and the European Union is China's #1 trading partner, it's India's #1 trading partner, and so on. However, I think that that's to frame the question in too harsh a manner. Much better to put the question, can we help each other as Europe and Australia? Can we help each other in today's world? Yes, we can. And can we help each other in Asia? Again, yes, we can. I was struck by a figure which someone from the Law Society gave me when I arrived in Australia a number of years ago. He said, David, guess how many Australian lawyers are fluent in Mandarin? Of course, I had no clue. I wouldn't have even known, 500, 700, 1,500, no idea. He said, it's 11,000. I thought, wow, how is this possible? I mean, amazing. But the following week, I understood a little bit better the point that he was making when I had a meeting in a big office skyscraper in Sydney. And on the Australian side of the table, at the very end, was a bright, fresh-faced, clearly young graduate, fully Australian and fully ethnic Chinese as well. And there I got a glimpse at what, how such a statistic could have arisen. Now, that's interesting. As a European, I find that resource of Australia interesting. And if I were in a European boardroom and I was planning business in China, I would ask myself the question, well, are there people in Melbourne or in Sydney or Brisbane or Perth with whom it might be advantageous for me to work? Is there an Australian I should make part of my team? It's just a question that I would ask. Now, the ability of Australia to play this role, I think, will demand of Australians asking yourselves the question, just how Asian are we? And it's not for me to have any particular view on that, but how Australia is perceived by other countries in Asia, I think, will be an important indicator for you in answering that question for yourselves. In the European context, firstly, when you're looking at the world and you're sitting in your sort of geopolitical desk in Brussels, you look at the world, which is a small world. We deal with global problems. We're looking to find solutions. We're looking to see with whom can we work best. Who can be a partner in the endeavour for searching for solutions, whether it's international security, climate change, the global economy, whatever. And you very quickly understand that you can achieve a lot more with countries that share the same fundamental values as you do, like the values that Patrick mentioned, fundamental democratic values, respect for human rights, and so on. It doesn't matter that from time to time we sometimes are imperfect in our pursuit of these values. What matters is that we hold to them and that we are vigilant to see that they are upheld. And in this context, of course, you're sitting in Brussels and you look and you see, well, there is Australia, a big country in the South Pacific of Asia, with which we share fundamental values. So shouldn't we be doing more together with Australia? Shouldn't we be talking more to Australia? The answer to this is yes. And I'm very happy to say that, to see that in the 3 years I've been here in Australia, we have seen an increasing range of dialogues with Australia on an ever wider range of topics. It used to be the case that you mentioned European Union in Australia and the only thing anybody would come up with was something about agricultural trade. Well, these days are over. And in fact, just on that, I think Australia and the European Union are together at the forefront of trying to find a solution to the WTO Doha round. But that's getting a little bit ahead in terms of just the cultural aspects. In terms of culture in Europe, and I'll finish on this point, in Europe we are not, we don't have some mad European Union secret agenda to create a homogeneous European culture like a sausage. We rejoice in the rich diversity of European cultures, and we've worked hard to inculcate the sense that in Europe today you can be very comfortable with multiple levels of identity, and you can be comfortable with appreciating the culture of your neighbour without any fear that to appreciate another's culture is in any way detrimental to your own. And also that today's Europe is a platform on which, it's a stage on which you can perform and demonstrate your own culture. So this is the master plan, is to foster all of this cultural diversity, and for the EU to do that simply by supporting the efforts of the member states of the European Union. There is no European Union culture different from the diverse cultures of the member countries. And in this context, and it's a very long-winded way of saying that yes, we are absolutely delighted that in our culture program for 2013, Australia is one of the sort of invited guest countries, if you like, into our culture program, where Australian cultural organisations will be able to compete for European funding for cultural activities. And that's something that you'll hear more about over the coming months. So on that point, I'll stop for now.
Thank you, and thank you also to David and the team for the opportunity to speak here tonight. I guess I do also want to acknowledge my predecessor, Alison Carroll, who is in the audience tonight, as I've been in the role, as most of you know, for nearly 2 years, but Alison had over 20 years, I think, really building the foundations of AsiaLink Arts, and a lot of the ideas that I think I've been distilling over the last couple of years owe a lot to Alison, but on some things perhaps we have a different perspective, which is why this discussion I think is all very, very important. I agree that the equation, in fact, begs a number of other questions, and I guess that's how I phrased my responses, because I think the positioning of the relative role of Australia in Europe and cultural engagement with Asia presumes that Australia does actually have some answers to the directions of its own strategy for engaging with Asia. And I think that's actually open for discussion and is really the subject, we've tried to make it a very big subject as part of the Asia Century White Paper, and in particular to draw those two national cultural policy pieces of work together, the national cultural policy and the Asia Century White Paper. We keep being assured that yes, we have traction on that, but I guess I'm not super confident. So the more discussion we have around that, I think the better. So the three, I guess, key questions that I think need to be framed are, why is cultural engagement with Asia important? And I think some of those things have been touched on today or tonight by the other speakers, but I'm really interested to start that discussion and share to see, do we have that in common with our priorities in Asia? Are they common with Europe? How are we engaging? What are the best strategies? And this is absolutely crucial, because over the last 20 years, Australia has changed and Asia has changed. And I guess the models, the old models that we might have presumed or we might have used to work, and in fact are no longer necessarily relevant. And I think that's where Australia is actually able and is starting to play a very big role. And finally, who is the collective we when we talk about, what we're doing or how we are engaging? And I think that next issue of Australian identity, what is it that we are trying to engage with in Asia? So just very quickly, I guess in terms of, why cultural engagement with Australia is important, I mean, it's a multifarious, answer. I've come up with at least 7. I'm sure there may be more, and happy that they come out in discussion later, but quickly just to run through, primarily, I guess, Asia is has an amazingly rich cultural heritage, as you all know, but it's also incredibly at the leading edge of a lot of the innovations that are occurring not only in technology, but in culture and in industry. And just the sheer scale and size of Asia and what is happening leads to all sorts of possibilities and innovations that, in fact, Australia can learn much of and really can play a role in being a participant. Secondly, I think that it does enhance social harmony when people understand each other's position much better, and that's why there has been such, I think, an issue on cultural literacy and cultural engagement, particularly language, as you mentioned. Of course, to maximise economic opportunities for business and government, given what's happening in Asia. Asia is a powerhouse, and whilst I agree the issue of geographic proximity is a little bit of smoke and mirrors. In fact, it is about perception, but we cannot take that geographic proximity on that for granted.